The story of the Yara. Down in the south, where the sun shines so hotly that everything and everybody sleeps all day, and even the great forest seems silent, except early in the morning and late in the evening. Down in this country there once lived a young man and a maiden. The girl had been born in town, and had scarcely ever left it, but the young man was a native of another country, and had only come to the city near the great river, because he could find no work to do where he was. A few months after his arrival, when the days were cooler, the people did not sleep so much as usual. A great feast was held a little way out of town, and to this feast everybody flocked from 30 miles or more. Some walked, some rode, some came in beautiful golden coaches, but all had on splendid dresses in blue or red, while wreaths of flowers rested in their hair. It was a long time. It was the first time that the youth had been present on such an occasion, and he stood silently aside, watching the graceful dances and pretty games played by the young people. And as he watched, he noticed one girl, dressed in white with scarlet pomegranates in her hair, who seemed to him lovelier than all the rest. When the feast was over, the young man returned home. His manner was so strange that it drew the attention of all his friends. Through his next workday, the youth continued to see the girl's face, throwing the ball to her companions, or treading her way between them as she danced. At night, At night, sleep fled from him, and after tossing for hours on his bed, he would get up and plunge into a deep pool that lay a little way in the forest. This state of things went on for some weeks, and at last chance favored him. One evening, as he was passing near the house where she lived, he saw her standing with her back to the wall, trying to beat off with her fan the attacks of a savage dog that was leaping at her throat. Alonzo, for that was his name, sprang forward, and with one blow of a fist stretched the creature dead upon the road. Then he helped the frightened and half-fainting girl into a large, cool veranda where her parents were sitting, and from that hour he was a welcome guest of the house. It was not long before he was the promised husband of Julia. Every day when his work was done, he used to go up to the house, half hidden among flowering plants and brilliant creepers, where the hummingbirds darted from bush to bush, and the parrots of all colors, red and green and gray, shrieked in chorus. There he could find the maiden waiting for him. They would spend an hour or two under the stars, which looked so large and bright that you felt as if you could almost touch them. "What did you do last night after you went home?" suddenly asked the girl one evening. "Just the same as I always do," he answered. "It was too hot to sleep, and there was no use going to bed, so I walked off to the forest and bathed in one of the deep, dark pools at the edge of the river. I've been there consistently over several months. But last night, a strange thing happened. I was taking my last plunge when I heard, sometimes from one side and sometimes from another, the sound of a voice singing more sweetly than any nightingale, though I could not catch any words. I left the pool, and dressing myself as fast as I could, I searched every bush and tree around the water, as I fancied that perhaps it was my friend who was playing a trick on me. But there was not a creature to be seen, and when I reached home, I found my friend fast asleep." Julia listened. Her face grew deadly white, and her whole body shivered as if with cold. From her childhood she had heard stories of terrible beings that lived in the forests and were hidden under the banks of the river, and could only be kept off by powerful charms. Could the voice which had bewitched Alonzo had come from one of these? Perhaps, who knows, it was the voice of the dreaded Yara herself, who sought young men on the eve of their marriage as her prey. For a moment, the girl sat choked with fear as the thoughts rushed through her. And then she said, "Alonzo, will you promise me something?" "What is that?" he asked. "It is something that has to do with our future happiness." "Oh, it is serious then. Well, of course I promise. Now tell me." "I want you to promise," she answered, lowering her voice to a whisper, "never to bathe in those pools again." But why not, Queen of my soul? Have I not gone there always? Nothing has harmed me, flower of my heart. No, but perhaps something will. If you will not promise, I shall go mad with fright. Promise me. Why? What is the matter? You look so pale. Tell me why you are frightened. Did you not hear the song? She asked, trembling. Suppose I did. How could that hurt me? It was the loveliest song I ever heard. Yes, and after the song will come the apparition. And after that... I don't understand. Well, after that... death. Alonso stared at her. Had she really gone mad? Such talk was very unlike Julia, but before he could collect his senses, the girl spoke again. That is the reason why I implore you never to go there again. At any rate, so after we are married. And what difference will our marriage make? There will be no danger then. You can go and bathe there as often as you like. But tell me, why are you so afraid? Because the voice you heard, I know you will laugh at this, but it's quite true. It was the voice of the Yara. With these words, Alonso burst into a shout of laughter, but it sounded so harsh and loud that Julia shrank away shuddering. It seemed as if he could not stop himself, and the more he laughed, the paler the poor girl became, murmuring to herself as she watched him. Oh, heaven, you have seen her. What shall I do? Faint as her whisper was, it reached the ears of Alonso, who, though he could not speak for laughing, shook his head. You may not know it, but it is true. Nobody who has seen the Lara laughs like that. And Julia flung herself on the ground, weeping bitterly. At this sight, Alonso became suddenly grave, and kneeling by her side, gently raised her up. Do not cry so, my angel, he said. I will promise anything you please. Only let me see you smile again. With a great effort, Julia checked her sobs and rose to her feet. Thank you, she answered. My heart grows lighter as you say that. I know you will try to keep your word and to stay away from the forest. But the power of the Yara is very strong. The sound of her force is apt to make men forget anything else in the world. Oh, I've seen it, and more than one betrothed maiden lives alone, heartbroken. If ever she could return to the pool where you heard the voice, promise me that you will at least take this with you. And opening a curiously carved box, she took out a seashell shot with many colors, and sang a song softly to it. The moment you hear the Yara's voice, said she, put this to your ear, and you will hear my song instead. Perhaps, I do not know for certain, but perhaps I may be stronger than the Yara. It was late that night when Alonso returned home. The moon was shining on the distant river, which looked cool and inviting, and the trees of the forest seemed to stretch their arms out and beckon him near. But the young man steadily turned his face in the other direction and went home to bed. The struggle had been hard, but Alonso had his reward the next day in the joy and relief with which Julia greeted him. He assured her that, having overcome the temptations, the danger was over now, but she, knowing better than he did the magic of the Yara's face and voice, did not fail to make him repeat his promise when he went away. For 3 nights, Alonso kept his word, not because he believed in the Yara, for that he thought the tales of her were all nonsense, but because he could not bear the tears which he knew that Julia would greet him if he confessed that he had returned to the forest. But in spite of this, the song rang in his ears, and daily grew louder. On the 4th night, the attraction of the forest grew so strong that neither the thought of Julia nor the promises he had made her could hold him back. At 11 o'clock, he plunged into the cool darkness of the trees and took the path that led straight to the river. Yet, for the first time, we found that Julia's warnings, though he had laughed at her at first, had remained in his memory, and he glanced at the bushes with a certain sense of fear which was quite new to him. When he reached the river, he paused and looked round for a moment to make sure that the strange feeling of someone watching him was fancy, and that he was really alone. But the moon shone brightly on every tree, and nothing was to be seen but his own shadow. Nothing was to be heard but the sound of the rippling stream. He threw off his clothes and was just about to dive in headlong when something, he did not know what, suddenly caused him to look around. At the same instant the moon passed behind a cloud, and its rays fell on a beautiful golden-haired woman standing half-hidden by the ferns. With one bound he caught up his mantle and rushed headlong down the path he had come, fearing at each step he would feel a hand laid on his shoulder. It was not till he had left the last of the trees behind and was standing in the open plain that he dared to look around. Then he thought he saw a figure in white still standing there, waving her arms to and fro. This was enough. He ran along the road harder than ever, and never paused till he was safe in his own room. With the earliest rays of dawn, he went back to the forest to see whether he could find any traces of the Yara. But though he searched every clump of bushes and looked up every tree, everything was empty. The only voices he heard were those of the parrots, which are so ugly that they only drive people away. "I think I must be mad," he said to himself, "and have dreamt all that folly." And going back to the city, he began his daily work. But either that was harder than usual, or he must be ill, for he could not fix his mind upon it, and everybody he came across during the day inquired if anything had happened to give him that white, frightened look. "I must be feverish," he said to himself. "After all, it is rather dangerous to take a cold bath when one is feeling so hot." Yet he knew, while he said it, that he was counting the hours for night to come, that he might return to the forest. In the evening he went as usual to the creeper-covered house, but he had better have stayed away, as his face was so pale and his manner so strange that the poor girl saw that something terrible had occurred. Alonzo, however, refused to answer any of her questions, and all she could get was a promise to hear everything the next day. On pretense of a violent headache, he left Julia much earlier than usual and hurried quickly home. Taking down a pistol, he loaded it and put it in his belt. A little before midnight, he stole out to the tips of his toes as to disturb nobody. Once outside, he hastened down the road which led to the forest. He did not stop till he reached the river pool. Holding the pistol in hand, he looked about himself. At every little noise, the falling of a leaf, the rustle of an animal in the bushes, the cry of a night bird, he sprang up and cocked his pistol in the direction of the sound. Though the moon still shone, he saw nothing. By and by, a kind of dreamy state seemed to steal over him as he leaned against a tree. How long he had remained in this condition he could not have told, but suddenly he woke with a start, and hearing his name, he heard softly. "What was that?" he cried, standing upright instantly, but only an echo answered him. Then his eyes grew fascinated by the dark waters of the pool close to his feet, and he looked at it as if he could never look away. He gazed into the depths for some minutes, when he became aware that down in the darkness was the brightest spark, which got rapidly brighter and bigger. Again that awful feeling took possession of him, and he turned his eyes from the pool, but it was no use. Something stronger than himself compelled him to keep him there. At last the waters parted softly, and floating on the surface he saw the beautiful woman whom he had fled only a few nights before. He turned to run, but his feet were glued to the spot. She smiled at him and held out her arms, but as she did so there came over him the remembrance of Julia, as he had seen her only a few hours earlier, and her warnings and fears of the very danger in which he now found himself. Meanwhile, the figure was always drawing nearer, nearer. But with a violent effort, Alonzo shook off his stupor, and taking aim at her shoulder, he pulled the trigger. The report awoke the sleeping echoes, and was repeated all through the forest. But the figure smiled still, and went on advancing. Again Alonzo fired, and the second time the bullet whistled through the air, and the figure advanced nearer. A moment more, and she would be at his side. Then, his pistol empty, he grasped the barrel with both hands and stood ready to use it as a club should the Yara approach closer. But it now seemed her turn to feel afraid, for she paused an instant while he pressed forward, still holding the pistol above his head, prepared to strike. In his excitement, he had forgotten the river, and it was not till the cold water touched his feet that he stood still by instinct. The Yara saw that he was wavering, and suffering herself to sway gently backwards and forwards on the surface of the river. She began to sing. The song floated through the trees, now far, now near. No one could tell whence it came. The whole air seemed full of it. Alonso felt his senses going and his will falling. His arms dropped heavily to his side, but in falling struck against a seashell, which, as he had promised Julia, he had always carried in his coat. His dimmed mind was just clear enough to remember that she had said, and with trembling fingers that were almost powerless to grasp, he drew it out. As he did, the song grew sweeter and more tender than before, but he shut his ears to it and bent his head over the shell. Out of its depths rose the voice of Julia, singing to him as she had sung when he gave him the shell. And though the notes sounded faint at first, they swelled louder and louder, till the mist which had gathered about him was blown away. Then he raised his head, feeling that he had been through strange places where he could never have wandered any more. He felt himself erect and strong, and looked about him. Nothing was to be seen but the shining of the river and the dark shadows of the trees. Nothing was to be heard but the hum of the insects as they darted through the night.